They told her she wasn't welcome in the store with her son until a millionaire walked in and changed the rules. The bell above the glass door chimed softly as Sarah crossed the threshold of the boutique. Her son Tyler slept against her chest in a worn baby carrier she had sewn herself. She wasn't looking for charity or luxury displays. She just needed a button. One simple button to finish a sewing job for a neighbor who was more demanding than polite. But the moment she stepped inside Ivory Rose Boutique, the whispers began. The employees, two women in cream-colored suits with eyes sharp as needles, looked her up and down, first at her, then at the baby, then at her worn sandals. And then, without trying to hide it, one of them walked over to intercept her before she could take another step. "Excuse me," she said with a voice sweet but cold as the marble floor. "What do you need?" Sarah swallowed hard. "A button, just one, for a white lace blouse, if you sell them individually." The woman gave a barely perceptible smile, not one of courtesy, but of contained mockery. "I'm sorry, ma'am, this store isn't suitable for coming with children, especially when they're sleeping on the merchandise." Sarah looked down. Tyler continued sleeping, oblivious to the stares his small presence unleashed. The air in the store grew heavier. The second employee approached as well. "You could come back another time, or try another store, perhaps one more accessible." The words weren't direct insults, but they said everything. The message was clear: you don't belong here. Sarah held their gaze for a few seconds. Her face didn't change, but her soul did, because it wasn't the first time, it wasn't the only time, and probably it wouldn't be the last. She turned on her heels, with silent dignity, and left the way she had entered. The door closed behind her with a soft click, like a sentence. Rain began to fall on the sidewalk. Her shadow slowly walked away through the puddles, carrying her son like both a shield and a wound. What she didn't know, what no one inside the store knew, was that someone else had seen everything from across the street. A man in a dark gray suit, leaning against a post, hands in his pockets and eyes fixed on her. He did nothing. Not yet, but something in his expression said that this story wouldn't end there. The rain wasn't intense, but it was persistent. Those small, cold drops that seep into your bones without warning. Sarah walked without an umbrella, her body curved to protect Tyler from the cutting wind. Each step echoed like her frustration, as if the city itself was pushing her back to where she belonged. She walked up a narrow street, past a closed old newsstand, crossed 2 avenues, and finally reached the building where she lived. 4 floors with no elevator. Her home a tiny apartment with thin walls, a stove that worked halfway, and a window that let in more noise than light. But it was hers. She had gotten it by cleaning other people's houses, washing clothes for neighbors, and mending garments no one else wanted to touch. She laid Tyler on the mattress they shared, took off his wet shoes, and covered him with the warmest blanket she had. Then she sat at her sewing table, took a deep breath, and closed her eyes. Why did it hurt so much? It wasn't the first time they had treated her this way. Since she got pregnant, and the baby's father disappeared without a trace, her life had been a sequence of closed doors. And yet, that episode at the store had stuck in her like a rusty pin. Maybe it was the women's stares, or maybe it was that for a second, she dared to imagine a different future. One where Tyler would see her enter a store without fear. One where his mother wouldn't be afraid to ask for a button. But dreams are dangerous when the world insists on waking you up with slaps. In the kitchen, she heated up watery soup she had made 2 nights before. While stirring the thick liquid, she remembered the words her mother used to tell her when she was still alive. "A woman is worth her spirit, not what she wears." She used to nod when she was a child. Today she didn't know if she still believed it. She finished sewing the commissioned blouse with a recycled button from an old shirt. She cleaned it carefully, sewed it with invisible thread, and stored the garment in a clear plastic bag. The next day she would deliver it, and collect barely enough to buy bread, milk and some rice. She sat on the floor, next to the bed, and watched Tyler sleep. He was oblivious to everything, to the humiliations, to the stares, to the leaking ceilings and words that hurt more than silences. She caressed his damp hair and silently promised herself that she would never let him feel less. Even if she had to swallow her dignity every day, even if she had to sew with rusty needles and fake smiles, she didn't know that that same night, the man in the dark gray suit was still thinking about her, that her story hadn't gone unnoticed, and that that man's past, so different and so similar, was about to cross with hers. Gabriel had gone unnoticed that afternoon, as he always did when he didn't want to be recognized. In his world, discretion wasn't just a preference, it was a necessity. From a young age, he learned that money could buy almost everything, except true silence. That's why he dressed in neutral tones, walked without a chauffeur, and avoided the press flashes that usually chased his last name. But that afternoon, in that store, it wasn't luxury that caught his attention. It was the way the woman left, holding the child with a dignity that contradicted the contempt with which she had been treated. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she just left. But what remained in the air was much stronger than a scandal. For years, Gabriel had been surrounded by empty words: business, stocks, results, profits, and yet, nothing had shaken him like the silent scene of that woman he didn't know. He spent the night in his glass and steel penthouse, unable to concentrate on reports or pending calls. His assistant sent him documents to sign. He left them unread. The city spread out at his feet like an illuminated model. But that night, the city didn't fulfill him. He thought about his own mother, how she had broken her soul raising 3 children on a seamstress salary, without anyone's help. He thought about his younger sister, who abandoned everything to care for her sick child. He thought, for the first time in a long time, about the values he had buried to survive in the world of the powerful. And then, without planning it completely, the next morning he returned to Ivory Rose Boutique. He entered with a firm step. The same employees were behind the counter, serving a client dressed in evening wear. When they saw him, they straightened their backs as if their spines were reactivated with a button. "Can I help you, sir?" asked one with a smile that this time was servile. Gabriel didn't respond immediately. He walked down the central aisle, stopping next to the rack where the woman had been intercepted the day before. He touched a white blouse, impeccable. Then he turned to them. "Yesterday I came looking for someone," he said without beating around the bush. "A woman you threw out. She was carrying a sleeping child in her arms. Do you remember her?" The looks crossed. Silence. "We wouldn't know what to say," stammered one of them. "Many people come, not many come with a child, and not many leave humiliated." There was an uncomfortable pause. If she felt uncomfortable, it was for security reasons. "You know children can run, breathe, bother," interrupted Gabriel, not raising his voice, but with a firmness that cut through the air. The women swallowed hard. The client in the background watched with curiosity. Gabriel approached the counter. He took a card from his pocket and left it on the marble. "If she comes back, tell her to look for me, and if she doesn't, I'll find her." He left without looking back. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she lived. But something inside him told him that this woman wasn't someone you simply let go. And Gabriel was never one to give up when something really touched him. Chapter 2. Sarah woke up before the sun. The sky was still covered by a thick gray, and the sound of wind hitting the windows warned that the day wouldn't bring rest. She sat on the edge of the mattress with her bare feet touching the cold floor, her eyes fixed on the ceiling stained by humidity. Beside her, Tyler still slept peacefully, hugging a teddy bear with an ear sewn more than once. In the corner of the small apartment, her sewing machine waited for her like every day. Sarah fixed her hair with an improvised clip, put on her worn cotton blouse, and approached the narrow table where scraps, spools, and interrupted dreams were piled up. Life had never been kind, but it hadn't broken her either. With each stitch she made, with each hem well done, she wove more than clothes. She wove resistance, future, dignity, even if no one saw it. That morning, after having weak coffee with pieces of old bread, she prepared Tyler and went out to deliver the client's blouse. The journey was short, but each step hurt. The scene at the store still weighed on her like wet fabric. She delivered the piece with a discreet smile. The client barely thanked her. She threw a bill in her hands and closed the door without looking back. On the way back, Sarah passed by a window display with long dresses and motionless mannequins. She remembered the times when she drew sketches in notebooks hidden at school. She dreamed of studying fashion, creating pieces that spoke to the soul. But real life had called her too early. The unexpected pregnancy, the abandonment, the need, and even so, there were nights when she still drew. On crumpled papers with pencils that no longer had points. Dreams kept like someone keeps old perfume. Arriving home, she prepared lunch for Tyler. He smiled with his eyes while eating rice with carrots. Sarah watched him as if he were a miracle she never asked for but thanked for every day. He was the reason she continued, and also the reason she couldn't fall. After lunch, while Tyler slept again, she took a piece of raw linen and began to sew without hurry. It was a piece for herself, something she never did, a simple dress with delicate details on the collar. She wanted to feel beautiful, just once, but just when she allowed herself this small luxury, someone knocked on the door. On the other side, a mailman left an envelope without a return address. Inside, a single sentence written by hand: "Sometimes the thread that resists most is the one no one looks at." And a business card, the name Gabriel in sober letters, no last name, just a phone number. No explanations. Sarah stood there motionless with the note in her hands and her heart beating out of rhythm. She didn't know who this man was, or why he would leave something like this. But some part inside her recognized that gesture, a type of attention that wasn't pity, but something else, something rarer, something dangerous, something that could sow new possibilities. Gabriel wasn't impulsive. In business, his decisions were surgical. He analyzed, observed, foresaw. But since that afternoon at the store, his logic began to fracture in silence. There was something about Sarah, in her way of holding the child, in her wounded dignity, that awakened a forgotten urgency. He didn't know her name. He only knew that that woman had been treated like he had seen his mother treated in supermarket aisles when money was scarce and other people's stares weighed more than the load in her arms, and he couldn't let that pass. He returned to Ivory Rose Boutique, but this time not as a curious man. He presented himself directly to the general manager, a haughty woman with a sharp last name, Mrs. Whitmore. Her face oscillated between forced kindness and disdain reserved for those who didn't know the codes of the place. "How can I help you, Mr. Gabriel?" she asked while escorting him to a private room with jasmine tea and cookies aligned like soldiers. "I was here a few days ago," he said, sitting with a serene gesture. "I saw how you treated a customer, a woman with a child. I want to know who she is. I want her name." The woman looked at him bewildered. She coughed slightly, as if the question were a breach of etiquette. "Sir, we don't usually register those who don't buy, much less those who what?" interrupted Gabriel calmly, but with a sharp look. Mrs. Whitmore swallowed hard. "She wasn't our usual customer profile, that's all, and that gives you the right to humiliate her." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. The padded walls of the office couldn't absorb the growing tension. Gabriel stood up. He walked to the window that faced the main street. The sky was beginning to clear, but the shadow of indignation remained inside him. "It's not just about her, it's about what you represent," he said without turning around. "A space where elegance matters more than respect, where crystal is worth more than a mother holding her child." The manager tried to regain control. "Sir, with all due respect, this store represents a brand, an experience. We can't allow every person who enters, every person, or just those who don't dress like you want them to." Gabriel turned slowly. He took a folder from the briefcase he carried. He left it on the table. "This is a purchase intention contract. I'm considering acquiring this chain, all of it, not just this store." The woman's eyes opened like windows on sale. "Excuse me, and if I do," he continued, without changing his tone, "the rules will change. I want a business that represents elegance, yes, but also humanity." Mrs. Whitmore began to stammer, but Gabriel was no longer listening. He took his coat and left without more words. While walking down the street, he checked on his phone the number he had left in that envelope. He still hadn't called. He didn't want to invade. He wanted to offer. He knew that to find someone like Sarah, resources weren't enough. It took time, tact, and a little luck. What Gabriel didn't know was that Sarah already had the envelope in her hands, and she was reading it for the 5th time, wondering if she should dial that number or bury it in the bottom of her drawer. The number on the paper seemed to be looking at her, as if it had eyes, as if it knew that Sarah had been sitting on the edge of the bed for more than an hour, phone in hand, without gathering the courage to dial. Every time she intended to, an internal voice, one that had strengthened with years of disappointments, whispered to her that it wasn't worth it, that men like that didn't do things without expecting something in return, that women like her shouldn't get into foreign territories, and yet, the sentence from the note still vibrated inside her. Sometimes the thread that resists most is the one no one looks at. A day later, in the middle of the afternoon, while mending a jacket for a regular client, someone knocked on her door. It was Tyler, who ran to see. His enthusiastic little voice announced, "Mom, there's an elegant man." Sarah frowned. She left the needle on the table and walked to the entrance. There he was, Gabriel, not in a gala suit, not in a luxury car, standing with a neutral expression, but eyes full of that same attention that had disconcerted her from the first moment. "Hello, Sarah." She nodded, not knowing whether to open the door completely. "I'm Gabriel," he added, slightly raising his hands, like someone who surrenders unconditionally. "I know this is strange, and I understand if you want me to leave. I just wanted to return something I think the world owes you." Sarah looked at him without moving. Then he took a small box from his pocket. He opened it, and inside, a white lace button, identical to the one she was looking for that afternoon at the store. She looked down, unable to help it. Her cheeks burned. "You didn't need to do this," she murmured, without a tone of gratitude or rejection, just truth. "I know," Gabriel said serenely, "but you also didn't deserve to be thrown out like they did." There was a moment of silence. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was fragile, like fine fabric that could tear or transform into something new. "Can I come in for a minute?" he asked. "I'd like to see your work." Sarah hesitated. She looked at Tyler, who observed him with intact innocence. "Just a minute," she replied, opening the door. Gabriel entered carefully. He observed the sewing machine, the aligned threads, the papers with crooked sketches, the garments hanging on improvised hangers. Nothing was perfectly ordered, but everything had soul. "Do you do this alone?" "Yes, for years. I started with hems. Now I make some pieces by commission." Gabriel took one of the drawings resting on the table. It was a simple dress, with dropped sleeves and cross seaming at the center. He looked at it like someone observing a map to another world. "You have talent," he said in a sincere tone, "and vision." She shrugged, uncomfortable with compliments. "It's nothing professional, and yet, it's better than many things I've seen on runways," he replied. Sarah looked at him, surprised. That sentence didn't sound like an empty compliment. It seemed like a conclusion. "Why are you here, Gabriel?" she finally asked. He looked at her, serious, and then he said, "Because I think you don't need a button. You need an opportunity. And I, for the first time in a long time, have the feeling that helping you shine will make me better too." Sarah didn't know what to answer. In her world, men didn't talk like that. No one talked like that. And yet something in her chest loosened, like an internal seam that could no longer resist so much defense. Gabriel left shortly after, without pressing, without asking for anything. He just left his card on the table, and a simple proposal. "If you ever want to talk about your project, here's my number." And he left. Sarah closed the door, and for the first time in a long time she felt that something new and unknown was about to begin. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. It wasn't from anxiety, not even from confusion. It was from something stranger, hope. She sat in her sewing corner, with her legs crossed and the dim light of the lamp on. Tyler slept, and the silence of the apartment seemed lighter, as if there was room to breathe. On the table, next to the fabric scraps, Gabriel's card still rested. She hadn't touched it since he left, and yet she couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. "Helping you shine will make me better too." Who said something like that, and why to her? She took the box with the button he had brought her. She held it between her fingers, so small, so insignificant. But in that gesture, there was more respect than in all the words she had been told in years. For an instant, she allowed herself to imagine it. A small shop, white walls, wooden hangers, her sewing machine in the back, and a window where Tyler could sit and draw while she designed. Was it possible? Or just one of those illusions that life crushes with bills and necessities? She sighed. She kept the button in a small box with threads and closed her eyes. The next day, she went out to deliver another garment. On the way, she stopped at the usual bakery. The woman who served looked at her with sincere kindness. "Did you cut your hair?" she asked. Sarah smiled. "No, I think I just feel different." The woman looked at her with curiosity, but didn't insist. On the way home, she saw an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor, struggling with a grocery bag. Without thinking, she ran to help her. She helped her up the stairs, put away the groceries, make tea. While stirring the hot water, Mrs. Eleanor looked at her with tenderness and said, "You have a light in your face, Sarah, a new strength. What happened?" Sarah didn't know what to answer, how to explain that someone had touched her soul without touching her body. How to say that a stranger had believed in her more than many close people. She only said, "I think for the first time, someone really looked at me." Mrs. Eleanor nodded in silence, as if she understood without words. Sometimes the threads that hold us aren't visible. Have you ever felt that you just needed someone to believe in you, even if it was just once? Tell me in the comments. Your story matters more than you think. 3 days passed without contact. Sarah returned to her routine, but something in her no longer fit the same way. Her steps followed the same path. Her sewing remained precise. Her time with Tyler remained the most sacred. But there was a thought that wouldn't dissipate. What if that wasn't coincidence? What if there really was an opportunity beating behind that door? On the afternoon of the 4th day, while ironing some shirts to deliver, her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She hesitated, took a deep breath, and answered. "Hello?" "Hello, Sarah," replied Gabriel's unmistakable voice, warm but without presumption. "Is this a bad time?" She swallowed hard. "No, it's not. I know I was direct the other time, and I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but I've been thinking about what I saw at your house, and I'd like to invite you to talk calmly. Coffee. No pressure. I want to listen to you. Listen to your ideas, your sketches. No promises, no commitments." Sarah's silence stretched for a few seconds. It wasn't common for someone to invite her to talk about her ideas, or about her world, or about anything that wasn't work. "Where?" she finally asked. Gabriel smiled, though she couldn't see it. "There's a small cafe on Maple Street, Helena's Corner. Nothing fancy, but it has comfortable chairs and good music. Tomorrow at 10. I'll be there." She hung up, and for a few seconds the air seemed lighter. The next day, she left Tyler with a trusted neighbor and walked to the cafe. She carried a folder with some drawings and a blouse she had finished sewing that dawn. Her hands were sweating, her heart too. Gabriel was already there. He dressed simply, without pretensions, and greeted her with a smile that didn't seek to impress, just give calm. They ordered coffee and oat bread. And then, he did something almost no one had done with her. He listened, without interrupting, without correcting, without comparing. Sarah showed him her designs. She talked about the fabrics she loved, about the clothes she dreamed of creating, comfortable pieces, made for real women, that embraced the body and didn't demand it. She talked about the workshop she imagined, about the corner for Tyler, about the idea of embroidering words on cuffs like secret messages. When she finished, she waited for Gabriel's response like someone waiting for a sentence. He took time to speak, not from lack of words, but out of respect for the moment. "You have something many designers have lost," he finally said. "You have truth, and that can't be taught." Sarah felt a strange warmth in her chest, but before she could get emotional, he added, "I want to help you build it, not as a benefactor, as a partner. Invest in you, but only if you're ready. Only if you want this to be real." She remained silent. Her fingers trembled slightly. "I don't need charity, Gabriel, and I'm not offering it. I'm betting." That word resonated in her mind. Betting. No one had bet on her, ever. "Let me think about it," she said firmly. Gabriel nodded with a smile. "Take your time. There's no rush. Good things are never sown in a hurry." They said goodbye with a handshake. Firm, warm, transparent. That night, Sarah returned home with the folder in her arms. But something inside her, much deeper, was also awakening again. The days that followed were marked by a tense but hopeful routine. Sarah debated between illusion and fear. Gabriel, in silence, prepared the steps for something much bigger than a simple business. But life, as it usually is, has its own rules, and sometimes the tragic ones impose themselves. One afternoon, Tyler began to have a fever. First a mild one, which Sarah tried to control with home remedies, but which soon transformed into an implacable fire that wouldn't yield. The little one cried without strength. His breathing was short, and his body feverish. Desperate, Sarah took him to the nearest public hospital, a place where the wait was long and resources scarce. Sadness and helplessness invaded her when the nurse informed her that she had to wait for some doctor to see her, that tests could take hours, and that medication would depend on whether she could cover the costs. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the world crushing her once again. It was then that a firm hand touched her shoulder. "Do you need help?" asked a warm and familiar voice. Gabriel appeared beside her without making noise, with the calm of someone who knows exactly when to be present. Without asking permission, he took the phone and began to call. In a few minutes, he managed the payment for the tests, the purchase of medication, and Tyler's temporary hospitalization. Sarah looked at him without being able to believe it. "You didn't have to do this," she murmured with a broken voice. "I didn't do it out of obligation," he replied. "I did it because no one should go through this alone." There was an instant where their gazes met, where the distance between the rich man and the humble woman disappeared like a torn curtain. "Tyler, now with medication, began to sleep peacefully. That night, while holding him in her arms, Sarah knew that something had changed. It wasn't just a matter of money or favors, it was the promise of a different path, a path where she wouldn't be alone. The city lights filtered through the window of Gabriel's penthouse, where the night seemed quieter than ever. He remained seated at his desk, with his eyes fixed on an old black and white portrait. In the image, a woman with a warm smile and a small child, both embraced with a tenderness that still hurt. Gabriel wasn't just a successful businessman. He was a man marked by loss. He had lost his wife and daughter in an accident years ago, an emptiness that neither money nor power had managed to fill. That tragedy had turned him into someone cold and distant, someone who built walls around his heart. But that afternoon, seeing Sarah and Tyler, he felt something different. For the first time in a long time, something inside him broke and opened to hope. He remembered how his mother, a humble seamstress, fought every day to support her family. How, in those moments of solitude, she taught him that true love is the one given without conditions, the one that remains even when everything seems lost. Gabriel took the phone and wrote a message to Sarah. "You're not alone. Neither you nor Tyler. I'm here." It was a confession, a bridge stretched toward an uncertain but possible future. In that instant, he understood that true wealth wasn't in his fortune, but in the capacity to open up and love again. If you've ever felt the weight of loneliness and the strength that comes from sharing it, like this story and share it so no one feels invisible. The next morning dawned with a warm sun that illuminated the streets of Riverside Valley, as if announcing a new beginning. Gabriel, with the determination that only conviction can give, signed the documents that acquired the Ivory Rose Boutique chain. It was the first step to transform a space that had been a symbol of exclusion into a refuge of hope. Manager Mrs. Whitmore received the news with a mixture of incredulity and fear. But Gabriel wasn't interested in maintaining old practices or policies that hurt those who had the least. His vision was clear: elegance should be accompanied by humanity. He called Sarah and presented her with the new project, Sarah's Workshop, a place where her designs could come to life, and where women like her would find not only clothes but dignity and opportunity. Sarah felt her world expanding, that dream hidden in sketches and scraps was taking real form. And beside her, Gabriel wasn't just a partner, he was beginning to be a companion in every step. The inauguration was simple but full of emotion. The white walls were dressed in bright colors, the sewing machine sounded like music, and Tyler ran free among the hangers, among laughter that broke the ancient silence. The change wasn't just in the store but in their lives. The rules had changed, not by decree, but by the force of the heart. The afternoon of the inauguration became an unforgettable memory for Sarah, Gabriel, and everyone who crossed the doors of Sarah's workshop. Soft music caressed the atmosphere while the first customers, women from all corners of the neighborhood, admired the garments that carried in each stitch a story of struggle and hope. Tyler ran through the aisles with intact innocence, touching each fabric as if touching a piece of the future. Sarah watched him from a corner with contained tears, feeling that she had conquered more than rejection. She had conquered her dignity and her son's. Gabriel approached her with a sincere smile and took her hand. "This is just the beginning," he whispered. She nodded, with an open heart. For the first time, the word family had a new meaning, woven not only by blood, but by trust and respect. "Thank you," Sarah said with a broken voice, "for believing when no one else did." Gabriel looked into her eyes and said, "I always knew that true luxury is being able to change lives." The sun slowly hid, tinting the sky with golden and pink tones, like a promise of new days. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more tales that inspire and transform. Don't forget to share it and leave your comment so together we can continue weaving hope.